It has been about a week and a few days since I rescued these 4 little largemouth bass that you see behind me from my slowly dying backyard pond. For those of you who've been keeping up to date with the videos, I've been having some troubles keeping water in my pond with the ever-growing drought here in North Texas. It's been difficult to hold water in my ecosystem. I also have made the assumption that there might be a leak in my pond and the soil is not ideal for what I've been trying to do, and that is to make a little bass factory, a little 1-acre pond big bass factory. So over the past couple of weeks, I've been doing everything that I possibly can and making an effort to relocate some of the fish that I previously stocked in the pond and find different homes for them. So this is my 29-gallon fish tank that I purchased at Petco for about, I believe, 80 bucks, $100, I forget. But it wasn't too much. It was a pretty affordable fish tank. And it's what I'm using to raise these 4 little largemouth right here. These are Texas born and bred fish. The only life they know is my backyard and this fish tank right here. This is, again, about a week and a half update. The water temperature has remained right around, I believe, 68 to 69 degrees Fahrenheit. These fish are very aggressive. They know when it's feeding time. Whenever I come into the room, they come right to the top, right where I always feed them, and they wait for their meal. The primary food that I've been feeding them is some dried bloodworms, which people have said are good and also not necessarily the best. They're apparently not super high in protein, and although they're not terrible for the bass, there are other alternatives. So with that being said, I purchased some food this morning that we're gonna try to feed them today. And that way you guys have better ideas to what these little guys look like when they do feed. It's not often, people get to see juvenile bass feed in the wild, or at least in captivity. This was the original foliage that I went with. It's just some cheesy plastic stuff, and of course I had a SpongeBob pineapple in there too, because it's like probably my favorite cartoon ever. So we're gonna remove these as well today. Although they look hilarious, it's not an ideal scenario for these little bass. These fish need something natural, and if we include some actual aquatic vegetation like we have here, then it'll make for an overall better fish tank. So like I said, it's been about a week and a half too, so we're gonna do a water change. Everything's been good, been running ammonia tests, pH tests, everything's coming back normal. Everything is going good, but at any point in time, this tank could take a turn. So that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to keep up to date with it. Just for a little bit of reference, I would say it took maybe about a day for these guys to feel comfortable to feed. It's insane as to how resilient bass are. A lot of people were very concerned that I wasn't cycling the water and that these fish might be stressed out, and they were worried I wasn't making sure the temperature was right for their habitat. But one thing I've learned about raising bass in the Guggen fish tank, and then that one time I put a bass on a swimming pool, which was not smart. But one thing I've learned is bass are very resilient. I mean, I fished in some pretty crazy areas where there's copious amounts of trash and pollution and litter, but I always seem to find bass and bluegill thriving in those spots. Not to say that it's good, but I would say bass are very tolerant to lower quality water. And again, that's not saying, you don't need to take care of these fish and you don't need to have the right water quality, but I will say that from my past experience, they're fairly easy to take care of. I've never taken care of fish that are this tiny. These fish are probably about an inch, if that, long. I've always taken care of fish that are about a pound or above. These guys seem to be very happy. They're very aggressive. They do not mind my presence at all. Anyway, let's start off with something fun. Let's feed these guys. I want to show you some food that was actually recommended by you guys. A lot of people were saying, like I said, bloodworms are great, good little food, but there's better options out there, especially if I want to grow these guys to be big and bodacious. And if we do eventually want to remove these from the tank and then place them into a backyard pond 2.0. So Lucky and I this morning woke up bright and breezy, and we made a trip on over to Petco to pick up some food that you guys suggested that I feed the bass. Now I'm all new to this. Whenever I've fed bass in the past, it's usually been with little minnows or crayfish, but these guys are obviously too small to eat anything like that. I imagine in a natural scenario, these little juvenile bass are eating mosquitoes, little macroinvertebrates, which is basically just like little aquatic insects. They may even be eating like little bloodworms and midges and things of that nature. Actually, one thing, kind of a fun fact, a lot of residential areas will stock bass in surrounding ponds and like community neighborhoods to keep away the mosquitoes, because they do such a good job of controlling like pesky insects of that nature, because of course mosquitoes need water to reproduce. That's probably one of the reasons why they like the bloodworms so much. But anyway, yeah, so Lucky and I went to Petco this morning. We checked out the hamsters, the mice. It was a good time, but what we did is we picked up some alternatives. I got some brine shrimp right here. This one specifically promotes health. I don't know the difference between some of these because I got one brine shrimp and the other brine shrimp is just the original. So I don't, you got the OG brine shrimp and the other one that just promotes health. I would assume they both promote health. I don't know. But these are frozen. They come in little tiny cubes. I imagine one tiny cube is probably enough for the 4 of them. If not, I'll put another one in. I also heard a lot of suggestions saying don't overfeed these fish, which is smart because you don't want, you know, a bunch of deteriorating, decaying brine shrimp at the bottom of your tank. I also picked up some beef heart. I don't know what this is, but a lot of people said that beef heart is good for quick growth. It's high in protein, but the downside of something like this is it may cause organ failure. It might be a little bit too rich, but the crude protein levels in this is like 10%, whereas the brine shrimp is maybe 4%. So quite a big difference there. I'm gonna maybe try to feed them a little bit of that, like maybe once or twice a week, and then switch over to the bloodworms, the brine shrimp, just to kind of see which one they prefer. And then lastly, we got some frozen bloodworms. Along with that too, I got some krill, some frozen krill. And when I was a kid, funny enough, my mom used to raise angelfish, which I believe originate from South America and the Amazon. And I remember very vividly, she would get a slab of krill just like this, and she'd thaw them out and feed them to the angelfish, and the angelfish loved them. She had cichlids and angelfish, and they were all about that krill life. So I'm curious to see if the bass like the krill too. And the reason why I want to stick to frozen food is because that will reduce the odds of me putting something in there that's live and that could carry parasites. Most of this stuff is probably not going to have parasites because it is frozen. Again, that is just to my knowledge. It's from what I've read and learned. That may be untrue, but it seems like if you put like live food in there with these fish, they're probably going to like it more, and it's something that's more natural to them, but you run the risk of them getting infected with anything that live food could carry. So that's the reason why I'm going with frozen. Occasionally we'll feed them live stuff. I mean, that's the whole fun and the purpose of having, you know, pet bass or anything that's carnivorous. But for now, since they're in the early stages, we're gonna stick to the frozen stuff. So I'm really curious to see how this works. And again, you guys are probably gonna give me a lot of awesome insight. You're gonna be like, whoa, don't feed them krill, don't feed them this, and I'm all ears. This is a huge learning process for me. I've never raised little tiny largemouth before. But I would say thus far they're doing pretty good. Okay, anyway, you guys want to hear me talk. Let's feed these little guys. So cool to watch them channel their aggression and chase after something that they don't even know is dead. In their mind, they're like, this is fight or flight. They've got to eat this dead brine shrimp. These fish are so used to eating on top because the bloodworms that I have been feeding them, which are, you know, just these dried ones, float. So once I dropped that cube of brine shrimp in, it sunk to the bottom, and they were looking up. They're like, where's the food at? Where's the food at? We can smell it, but we can't, you know, we don't know where it's at. So they're still kind of in that learning process, and they're so glued to what I've been feeding them for about a week, and that is a floating food. So what I did is I took the net, you know, scooped up the cube again, and it dispersed a bit, and that's when they started going wild. Another funny thing I noticed too is when I went to use the net to scoop up the brine shrimp cube, it got a bit of water on the side of the tank, and they were actually pecking at the water droplets outside of the tank just because they thought it was something that they could eat. Very curious fish. It's just cool to watch. It's so intriguing to observe them and watch how they feed and interact with each other, interact with, you know, this fish tank, this confined space. But they seem to be thriving. You know, they love it. Every time I come in, they're always like anxious. They're curious, like, what's going on? Is he gonna feed us? Is the big ugly guy gonna feed us today? Pretty excited to feed them something a little bit different. Pretty hilarious too to watch them kind of fill up so fast. Their eyes are bigger than their stomach, and it's important you don't feed them too much because I swear to God they would just bust. I mean, they're so hungry. They're in that stage of their life where they have to constantly keep eating, and I don't think they know when to stop. They're efficient eaters. They don't really leave much behind. Every time I throw some bloodworms in there, for the most part, I'd say 90% of what I put in there is gone for the most part. Anyway, there you have it, feeding time for micro juvenile largemouth bass. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed witnessing that micro feeding frenzy. It's quite exciting. I'm now gonna do a water change on this tank. It's something that a lot of people recommend I do weekly. just to keep up with the water quality in this tank. These are fish that like to eat a lot and they like to poop a lot. And a lot of that poop and that sediment and that leftover food makes its way to the bottom, and it makes the tank dirty and increases, I believe it's nitrite levels, which is just very not good for a fish tank. I believe it's nitrite, don't quote me on that. Also ammonia levels too, not good. So also too high ammonia levels, not the best either. So we're gonna do a water change here. We're gonna take about 20% of the old water out of the tank and then replace it with some new water. I've been reading a lot and doing some research, and most people say that 20 to 25% is sufficient. Some guys go to like 50%, some people go really low. I feel like 20% is good because you're not taking too much water away from these fish and it doesn't stress them out a whole lot. But although I will say that these little largemouth seem to be very comfortable whenever I'm in the tank or around it. They don't seem to like scurry around. In fact, they're actually very interested in my presence. So we're gonna do a quick water change and put some new aqua in here for these little fishies to thrive in. All right, here is the water siphon tool that I'm using. I don't know the correct terminology for this, but it's what we're gonna use today to get the old water out into this Home Depot bucket. You might notice this one has a pump on it. Some of them don't come with pumps. Here is an example of one without a pump. If you get one without a pump, then you're going to have to use your mouth to start the process. And if you use your mouth, you risk the chance of getting some fish poop water down your gullet, which is just not nice. No one wants that. But these are obviously very useful for changing the water out of your tank. They kind of look like the wiener pump from Austin Powers. But that aside, let's get onto it. Gonna get some of this old water out and freshen it up with some new H2O. So that is just 1 week of fish, food, and poop that is accumulated in the bass fish tank. All that in there can be very, very detrimental to these little bass. They may not be the most fragile fish ever, but you know, you're keeping them in a very tight, confined area where they can't escape that dirty water. One thing I also failed to mention too is that it's important to unplug your filter and your aerator, or you know, anything that is electronic while you're doing the water change. Obviously, because once that water level drops, your filter won't work and it'll make a very obnoxious, annoying noise. So keep that in mind to unplug all your stuff while you're doing the water change. But yeah, it's important. Do water changes. This is kind of an eye-opener for me, and hopefully it is for you guys too. Now that the water's low, I'm gonna take this opportunity to do a bit of scrubbing. I'm gonna scrub the sides of the tank. Once I do that, I think we're going to introduce some of that aquatic vegetation I was talking about earlier. So here's what we've done thus far. It's been quite the process, but I'm sincerely enjoying this. We fed our fish a new meal, which they seem to love. We then changed out the water, took out some of the dirty, nasty poop and leftover food. So the tank has dropped by about 20%. And then afterwards, I included that driftwood that had been soaking in water for about 2 to 3 days to remove any sort of coloration. And I placed some real life aquatic vegetation on this driftwood. The last part of this whole process is we now have to add water that we subtracted and make sure that we've got a healthy level for that filter to run, and so these fish feel a little more comfortable. So right now I'm in the kitchen measuring the temperature so we can do a temperature match on the new water so it doesn't, you know, shock these fish at all. I believe it was right at 69 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm trying to match that right now. The tank is looking good. Looks very fresh and clean and re-amped. Check out some of that foliage. Looks a lot more natural, at least. There we have it. We've done quite a bit today. We've upgraded the tank, changed out the water, and given you guys a 1 week look into what it's like to own 4 very ferocious little juvenile largemouth bass. I hope this video inspires you guys to go out there and raise some fish of your own. Again, this is a very big learning process for me. This is as if I would compare this as to like me learning how to bass fish from the beginning. It took me many years to get to where I'm at now and learn how to fish and how to catch bass, and I'm still learning every day. So this whole tank thing is very new to me, and I'm very open and willing to hear a lot of your input, your comments, your ideas, suggestions, things of that nature. Obviously, this is going to be something that takes some time to get used to, a bit of trial and error here and there, but for the most part, things are looking great. The tank is good. I'm not 100% sure about the aquatic vegetation. It is marketed to grow on driftwood, which I have in the tank right now, but it's a little bit difficult to keep that vegetation stuck to the wood itself. So I did put a few pieces of stone on top of the vegetation so it wouldn't float to the surface. We also ran a water quality test with this master test kit, which is actually really nice. Everything looks good. Nitrite levels are a little bit high, but not by much, so I'm gonna monitor that. And the pH levels are a bit high too. I think it's like roughly like 8 or something like that. Luckily, bass can survive in a wide range of pH levels, anywhere between like 6 and 10, which is pretty insane, but it just goes to show how resilient these fish are. So I'm gonna monitor that nitrite level. It's just a little bit over what it needs to be, but you know, it doesn't take much to ruin a tank. So, but other than that, everything looks good. Ammonia looks good. Nitrate looks good. All the other tests came out pretty well. I'm happy that we got some clean water back in this tank. These fish look very happy and amped up. I'm excited to continue this project. I might make this a weekly thing. Maybe do like a twice a week tank update. I don't know, you guys will have to let me know. One thing I also wanted to stress too is these fish are obviously not gonna stay in this tank forever. These fish do grow fast. They are largemouth bass, so this is just a temporary solution. 4 bass in a 30-gallon tank obviously is not practical, but for now it's what we're gonna use until they get a bit bigger, and then we'll probably transfer them over to like an 80 or 100 and then so on and so forth, at least to the point in which they're big enough to where we can put them in another pond. So yeah, things are looking good. I'm stoked for this. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this little series and this project that I'm doing. But anyway, I am peacing out, signing out. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I'll catch you on the next one, and as always, folks, keep fishing, never stop.